At 8:05 on Monday morning, with 31 patients already waiting inside Oakmere Community Clinic, Janelle Sutton stepped in front of the reception desk and said, "Tessa will be in charge of the entire clinic beginning today." The announcement came before Dr. Janelle Sutton could finish the staff briefing. Marianne held out her hand for the burgundy Master Operations badge clipped to Janelle's lanyard. Behind her, Tessa stood beside the scheduling console in a cream suit chosen for the reopening cameras. Kendra Miles stopped writing on the staffing board. The receptionist froze. An older patient in the first row looked from Marianne to Janelle. "Does that mean Dr. Sutton isn't handling my care anymore?" No one answered. Janelle looked at the console and saw the red access banner across her account. Her permissions had already been removed. The question spreading through the waiting room was larger than the patients. Did Marianne actually have authority to replace Janelle, or had Sutton Money simply made the decision look official? Janelle unclipped the badge without argument. "Kendra, check Mrs. Bell's medication reconciliation flag before anything else changes." Marianne frowned. "This is an administrative transition. Tessa has been asked to stabilize the expansion." "Mrs. Bell's transportation window closes at 9, Janelle said. "Her new prescription has not been reconciled against her evening dose." Kendra opened the protected care queue and found that Mrs. Bell had been routed into a standard follow-up slot instead of the medication pathway Janelle had designed for high-risk patients. Janelle pointed to the pharmacy note. "Keep her in the protected pathway. 2-person confirmation." Kendra called another nurse. Less than a minute after losing her badge, Janelle had already shown why her role had never been ceremonial. She knew where the system could fail because she had built it around people who could not afford a missed bus, an unpaid afternoon, or a second trip across town. Tessa studied the schedule. There are too many exceptions. That's why the day looks chaotic. "Those are continuity protections," Janelle said. Marianne turned toward the Foundation Communications team. "Tessa has managed programs larger than this clinic. Oakmere needs discipline as it grows." Then she introduced Janelle to the room as one of our physicians and credited Sutton Health Foundation with creating the care model. A patient's daughter whispered, "I thought Dr. Sutton started this place." At the console, Tessa accepted a temporary credential and immediately removed the protected intake buffer, the 40-minute space reserved for patients arriving after overnight shifts or transportation delays. "We need a cleaner schedule before the donor walkthrough," she said. 3 appointments shifted. One belonged to a warehouse worker who had taken a morning off without pay. Another belonged to a woman waiting on an urgent referral. Janelle did not reach for the keyboard. Without verified authority, a struggle over the console would turn a governance dispute into a patient safety confrontation. "Kendra, start the 2-person escalation log. Every protected slot that changes gets a time, a reason, and the name of the person who authorized it." Tessa looked up. "I am authorizing it." "Then the record should say that." Marianne stepped closer. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm making it traceable." 10 minutes later, the warehouse worker's appointment disappeared from the active queue. Kendra searched twice. "He's been moved to Thursday." "He cannot come Thursday," Janelle said. Tessa answered without looking away from the screen. "Then he can call for another opening." Janelle looked at the full waiting room, the donor cameras, and the red banner covering her name. Someone had prepared this takeover before the doors opened. The only question was how far they had already gone. By 9 o'clock, Oakmere's waiting room was still full, but the order inside it had begun to collapse. 2 patients stood because no chairs remained. The receptionist repeated the same apology about delays, while Tessa rearranged the schedule into clean, evenly spaced blocks. On the screen, it looked efficient. In the room, it was failing. Janelle saw the bottleneck before anyone named it. Patients coming from overnight shifts were arriving inside the same 30-minute window, exactly what the protected intake buffer had been designed to prevent. Transportation pickups overlapped. Medication reviews collided with routine follow-ups. One interpreter was assigned to 3 appointments at once. "Kendra, start a manual transfer board," Janelle said. "Name, clinical risk, transportation limit, receiving option. No diagnosis in the public column." Kendra pulled a dry erase board from storage. They removed my scheduling edit rights, too. Then we work with what we can verify. Janelle crossed to Mrs. Bell. Your medication review is still active. We are confirming the timing before anyone changes it. Mrs. Bell studied her face. Are you still my doctor? I'm still your doctor today. The administrative question is separate. Across the room, Tessa told the receptionist to move non-urgent appointments into the afternoon so the donor tour could pass through the chronic care wing without congestion. Janelle stopped outside the restricted workstation line. That will push the overnight shift patients past their transportation windows. We can give them vouchers, Tessa said. Vouchers do not cover lost wages, missed medication timing, or a second trip. Tessa exhaled. Every adjustment becomes a crisis with you, because every adjustment touches a person. Marianne, standing near a photographer, gave Janelle a warning look. You are no longer directing operations. I am identifying a clinical continuity risk. Kendra added the first name to the manual board, then another. Within 15 minutes, the average wait rose from 24 minutes to nearly an hour. The warehouse worker approached the desk and asked why his appointment had been moved. The receptionist said the schedule had been optimized. He laughed once. I took today off without pay. Janelle checked his chart from a clinical terminal that still allowed patient care, but not scheduling. His blood pressure medication had been adjusted 10 days earlier. He cannot safely wait until Thursday without a coverage plan, she told Tessa. Then create one as his physician, Tessa said. I cannot authorize the protected slot you removed. Tessa's expression changed. She had not understood the difference between knowing what should be done and possessing the credentialed authority to do it. Marianne stepped in. The clinic has partner providers. Then we need verified receiving appointments, not a list of phone numbers. Kendra looked toward the facility's administrator. Who can approve that transfer? He checked his screen. Dr. Sutton's override used to cover it. Then assign it to me, Tessa said. You are not credentialed for clinical transfer authorization. For the first time, Tessa looked directly at Marianne. Marianne answered, temporary access can be expanded. Janelle said nothing. The weakness was now visible. She had centralized final override authority in herself, and secondary credentialing had not been completed before expansion day. She had planned to finish it after the first week. Now staff were trapped between unauthorized administration and incomplete delegation. Kendra, document the gap. Do not hide it. Kendra wrote. No secondary clinical transfer authorization active after master credential removal. At 10:15, the first chair emptied. The warehouse worker accepted a verified same-day appointment at a partner clinic after Kendra confirmed transportation and medication coverage. Before leaving, he looked at Janelle. I came here because you built it so people like me wouldn't have to start over. You should not have to start over today either, she said. The empty chair remained visible beside the full row. Janelle checked the read-only access history. Her permissions had been changed at 7:42 a.m., 23 minutes before Marianne's announcement. A notice at the bottom of the screen warned that temporary change logs would synchronize and overwrite at 7 that evening. If she waited for Oakmere's governing committee, the clearest evidence could disappear. If she acted now, the review would expose not only Marianne's overreach, but the dangerous dependency Janelle herself had created. The first empty chair was no longer the most important thing in the room. The clock was. At 11:40, Janelle closed the door of the consultation room beside the nurse's station and placed 3 pages on the table before Kendra. A draft clinical continuity, an unauthorized control notice, a preservation list, and the automatic consequences of filing. Kendra read the final line twice. This suspends your remaining administrative credentials too. Yes. And activates patient choice transfers. Yes. The waiting room could empty. Janelle looked through the narrow window. Patients still sat shoulder to shoulder, but 7 medication reconciliation alerts remained unresolved and 6 names now filled the manual transfer board. If we keep them here to protect Oakmere's image, we make them carry a risk they did not choose. Kendra lowered her voice. Marianne will say you shut the clinic down because you lost control. She may be right that too much control was concentrated in me. That does not make her appointment lawful. The review has to examine both. Janelle had already requested an emergency stay. The credentialing custodian had refused to issue one before the sponsor memorandum, access logs, and temporary appointment records were authenticated. 2 governing members were out of state. A third had recused because of foundation funding. The 72-hour emergency clause remained active unless formally stayed. Janelle could not stop it with a phone call. Russell tried anyway. His name appeared on her screen. "Do not submit anything until I speak with Marianne," he said. "The transfer can be reversed this afternoon." "By whose authority?" "Mine, if necessary." "That is the problem." Silence followed. "I signed a continuity memorandum," Russell said. "It was meant to protect the investment if operations became unstable." "Did you know Tessa lacked clinical governance qualifications?" "I knew she would need formal approval. And use sign language Marianne could use before that approval. I did not authorize her to remove you. You authorized a mechanism without protecting the boundary." Russell offered to revoke the appointment, restore Janelle's title, cover lost wages, even fund another site. She listened. "No private restoration. Send the full memorandum chain to the credentialing custodian. Every draft. We can settle this as a family." It stopped being only a family matter when patient access changed. She ended the call and signed the notice at 11:58. Kendra countersigned. The filing triggered 3 automatic actions. The system preserved badge logs, scheduling exports, staffing changes, referral records, patient transfer requests, training histories, and sponsor documents. It suspended all disputed administrative credentials, including Janelle's. It also activated Oakmere's protected patient choice protocol. Every patient whose care pathway had materially changed had to receive accurate information about delays, current coverage, and verified alternatives. Janelle addressed the staff. "No one blames a person. No one discusses the family dispute. We state only what we can verify: the delay, the coverage, and the receiving options. Necessary care continues here or through a confirmed partner." Tessa approached with Marianne behind her. "What did you file?" "A continuity notice." Marianne's voice sharpened. "You had no authority to initiate a shutdown." "It is not a shutdown. It is a preservation and patient choice process. You know what this will look like?" "Yes. That is part of the cost." The protocol began with the highest risk cases. Kendra confirmed a partner appointment for a diabetic patient whose transportation window was closing. A community health worker arranged a transfer for a woman whose medication review could not be completed under the altered schedule. Some patients stayed, some postponed, some left for verified care elsewhere. Every decision was documented. The preservation capture also recorded Janelle's failure. No secondary clinical override existed after her badge was removed. The evidence did not divide itself into one guilty side and one innocent side. It showed an unauthorized takeover operating through a system that had depended too heavily on one person. By 4:15, wide spaces had opened between the patients who remained. Janelle felt each empty chair as a loss, not a victory. At 6:42 p.m., the independent reviewer confirmed receipt of the evidence hold. Janelle's own access was now completely suspended. The review would begin with the record she had saved, but it would examine her too. When the waiting room emptied, no one would be able to say the consequence belonged only to Marianne's decision. Janelle had chosen the action that made the loss visible. Now, she would have to prove it was protection, not revenge. By 8:30 the next morning, Oakmere's waiting room no longer resembled the room Marianne had entered with cameras behind her. Her patients remained in 31 chairs. The silence made every sound distinct. The reception printer, Kendra's marker against the transfer board, the wheels of an empty transport chair being pushed toward storage. The other patients had not left in a single dramatic walkout. Their decisions had accumulated one by one through the process Janelle activated. 18 accepted verified appointments with partner providers after receiving accurate information about delays, medication timing, transportation, and current coverage. 4 left independently because they could not wait longer. Others postponed or completed limited care outside the waiting room. Every departure carried a reason, a time, and a receiving plan when required. Janelle stood near the clinical station with no badge and no administrative authority. She did not gather patients, explain the family dispute, or ask anyone to support her. She checked that necessary care continued somewhere safe. Mrs. Bell remained in the first row. "Are they coming back?" she asked. "Some will. Some may decide another clinic is better for them now." "Is that what you want?" "I want them to have care they can trust." At the console, Tessa stared at the shrinking queue. The schedule she had created now contained more empty space than appointments. The donor walkthrough had been canceled, though Mary Ann called it postponed. A Foundation Communications employee photographed the renovated wing without showing the waiting room. Mary Ann dictated language about a temporary adjustment caused by resistance to a necessary leadership transition. Kendra looked toward Janelle. Janelle shook her head. "No contestatement." The evidence needed less commentary. The disruption was already measurable. Average wait time had risen from 24 minutes to a peak of 96. 7 medication reconciliation flags had required manual intervention. 19 appointments had been canceled or transferred. 2 community health workers had lost scheduled hours because their patient groups were moved. Tessa approached Janelle. "You knew this would happen when you filed. I knew people would be given choices. You knew they would leave. I knew some could not safely wait inside a system that changed without review." Tessa folded her arms. "You could have helped stabilize the schedule. My administrative access was removed. You still knew the system. Knowledge is not authority." Mary Ann joined them. "The Foundation Board will receive a report saying you initiated mass transfers after losing your position. The transfer records will say what each patient was told and where each patient went. You are hiding behind procedure. I'm staying inside it." Mary Ann lowered her voice. "People will remember an empty clinic. They will not remember your explanation." Janelle looked across the rows of vacant chairs. Mary Ann was right about the image. A full waiting room had represented years of trust, evening appointments, transportation coordination, and staff relationships. Now the empty room could be used as proof that Janelle's system failed the moment she lost control. Near noon, the credentialing custodian formally suspended all disputed executive authority. Tessa retained only limited scheduling visibility. Janelle remained restricted to supervised clinical duties. An interim continuity team would begin the next morning. The order restored no one. It froze the conflict while patients continued care elsewhere. Russell arrived shortly after the notice was posted. He entered through the administrative corridor and asked to speak with Janelle privately. In a consultation room, he opened a folder embossed with the Sutton Health Foundation seal. "I can end this today," he said. Janelle looked at the folder, then at him. The waiting room had emptied because she refused to trap patients inside a broken system. Now her father was offering to fill the institutional vacuum with the same family power that created it. Russell arranged the papers as though order on the table could restore order everywhere else. The first page offered Janelle immediate reinstatement as executive director. The second guaranteed reimbursement for lost salary. The third authorized planning for a new building bearing her name. A fourth required Mary Ann to issue a private written apology. Beneath those promises, Sutton Health Foundation retained budget veto, naming approval, donor access, and the right to nominate future leadership. "You will be back by Monday," Russell said. The review could continue without keeping patients in limbo. Janelle read every page. "This restores me through the same authority Mary Ann used to remove me. It corrects an abuse. It replaces one donor decision with another." Russell leaned back. "Oakmere exists because the foundation carried the financial risk. Oakmere exists because patients trusted the care. Both can be true. Not if the money decides who has professional authority." His expression hardened. "You are letting principle prolong harm. I activated transfers so patients would not carry that harm. And now the room is empty." Yes, she did not defend herself from the image. That is the cost of telling people the truth about their options. Janelle opened the memorandum chain. Did the first version contain the 72-hour limit? Yes. Did it state Mary Ann could not alter protected clinical pathways? Oakmere's policies already stated that. Then why sign language that allowed her to claim executive continuity authority before ratification? Russell was silent. He had trusted private understanding, reputation, and money to keep the boundary from being crossed. I believe Marianne would use the clause only if operations became unstable, he said. She decided they were unstable because I would not hand her daughter my job. I did not know she planned to appoint Tessa. You knew Tessa lacked clinical governance qualifications. Yes. Janelle separated the identity documents from the role materials. The first group contained the state acknowledgement of parentage, amended birth record, dependent insurance records, and prior conflict disclosures. The second contained Oakmere's protocols, training records, scheduling designs, and performance reports. These answer different questions, she said. The first proves, I am your daughter, and the foundation should have disclosed the conflict. It does not prove I deserve to lead Oakmere. Russell looked at the second group. No one disputes that you built the program. Marianne did in front of patients. Then I will correct that publicly. You can correct what you knew and what you signed. You cannot appoint me. He looked hurt. You would rather let strangers decide whether you keep what you built. I would rather have a process strong enough to decide without being afraid of you. Russell closed the folder. What do you want from me? The complete memorandum chain. No call to the governing committee. No promise of funding tied to the outcome. No private conversation with a reviewer. And after that, you accept what the evidence says about your choice. Janelle did not accuse him of never loving her. She knew he loved her. That made the failure more exact. He had recognized her judgment since she was 12, when she reorganized medical delivery cards during a winter delay and wrote need comes before distance across one route. He had kept the card for decades. Yet when professional authority was threatened, he trusted financial control more than the judgment he claimed to admire. Russell left the memorandum drafts behind. Janelle submitted the identity records through Oakmere's compliance administrator. The state custodian would authenticate them. The finding would be limited. She was Russell's legally acknowledged direct daughter, and Marianne's implication that she was unrelated was false. Nothing in that chain would establish competence, authorship, or reinstatement. Kendra joined her later. The interim team starts tomorrow. They want you available as a technical consultant. You cannot approve anything. Janelle nodded. Good. Most people would not call that good. Most people did not build a system that stopped functioning when one badge disappeared. The review had already confirmed that 2 urgent corrections could not be authorized after her access was removed. Marianne had exploited the weakness, but Janelle had created it. The next stage would test a question more dangerous than whether she built Oakmere. Could Oakmere operate safely without her? If the answer was yes, the clinic might recover. It might also prove the founding physician was no longer necessary. The interim operations room contained 3 desks, 3 separate credentials, and no master badge. Kendra held clinical flow authority. Calvin Denby controlled administrative continuity. Dr. Felix Wardell held final safety escalation during the pilot. Janelle sat at a 4th desk with read-only access and no approval rights. She could explain the system, but she could not run it from the edges. The protected slot matrix assumes one person resolves every conflict, Felix said. That person was me, Janelle answered. Then redesign it. She divided the matrix into 3 decision categories. Clinical risk required a licensed reviewer and a second clinical confirmation. Scheduling continuity belonged to Kendra and a trained coordinator. Patient transfer required verified receiving capacity and a separate documentation check. No one person could alter all 3. Emergency overrides expired automatically and triggered review. What happens when the roles disagree? Calvin asked. The patient receives the safest available option while the disagreement is documented. No silent override. The first test involved a patient whose transportation window conflicted with a delayed laboratory result. Under the old model, Janelle would have changed the slot herself. Under the pilot, Kendra identified the risk. Felix confirmed that the delay did not require postponement, and the coordinator secured transportation 40 minutes later. Janelle watched without interrupting. Kendra chose a solution she would not have chosen, but it worked. The second test involved two essential appointments competing for one interpreter. The interim team reassigned support, delayed one standard intake, and preserved both essential visits. Again, no one asked Janelle for permission. 4 emergency scheduling decisions were completed that day without her approval. Each successful decision weakened the argument that Oakmere required her sole control. It also strengthened the value of the system she was willing to change. The role evidence review moved beside the pilot. Server history showed that Janelle created the protected slot matrix, referral rules, medication protocol, and community health worker curriculum. Training records showed that Kendra and the staff learned those systems under her direction. Partner clinic correspondence confirmed that she negotiated verified transfer pathways months before the crisis. Patient Advisory Council minutes showed repeated consultation about evening access and transportation barriers. Marianne and Tessa had not authored any of it. The same evidence showed where Janelle's control remained too concentrated. Her account approved nearly every exception during expansion. The secondary credentialing task appeared in 3 planning notes, each postponed because another deadline took priority. Keep the dates, Janelle told the reviewers. The sequence matters. By the 3rd pilot day, 43 of 48 protected patients had been safely rescheduled or transferred. All 7 medication reconciliation flags were resolved. Average wait time fell from 96 minutes to 38. 4 emergency decisions were completed without Janelle. Patient representatives agreed to return for a limited reopening if dual control remained active and transfer rights stayed visible. 4 patients entered the waiting room that afternoon. They did not applaud when they saw Janelle. One nodded. Another asked Kendra where to check in. The ordinary behavior carried more meaning than public praise. Tessa visited during the final test session. She watched Kendra and Calvin approve a protected slot change through separate credentials. "You designed this after the notice?" she asked. "I redesigned it after the notice. So the old system really could not function without you. Not safely enough." Tessa seemed relieved. Then Marianne was not wrong about everything. No, she was wrong to treat a weakness as permission to take control. Tessa watched the staff complete another decision. If this works, they may decide they do not need you. That is possible, and you are helping them prove it. I'm helping them protect the patients. Russell received the midpoint report and sent the complete memorandum chain to the review administrator without argument. It was his first accountable action that did not ask for a private outcome. Marianne reacted differently. The pilot weakened both parts of her story. Janelle had not destroyed Oakmere out of spite, and the clinic's value did not come from Foundation control. Foundation communications began asking staff to confirm that Tessa's transition had been planned for months. A retrospective summary circulated claiming the continuity system had always belonged to Sutton Health Foundation. Kendra forwarded it to the panel without answering. Janelle had shown that her work mattered. She had also shown that Oakmere could survive without placing her at its center. Across town, Marianne opened a selective email export and began preparing a record designed to make that choice easier. Marianne's selective export reached the Oakmere Independent Care Review Panel on Monday morning with her signature above a statement claiming that Janelle resisted a planned transition and then used patient transfer procedures to make the clinic appear unsafe. Attached was a retrospective summary dated 2 weeks before the reopening, describing Tessa as Oakmere's designated successor and the continuity model as a Sutton Health Foundation program. For several hours, the record looked damagingly complete. It included messages in which Janelle warned that protected scheduling could not operate safely without final clinical authorization. It included planning notes showing she postponed secondary credentialing 3 times. It included her notice, the suspension that followed, and the numbers from the empty waiting room. Marianne's version did not need to invent every fact. It only needed to arrange true facts, so Janelle appeared possessive and reckless. The governing committee froze the expansion indefinitely while the panel examined the submission. Foundation discretionary funding was suspended. 2 Oakmere employees accepted temporary work elsewhere. An external nonprofit healthcare group was invited to present a permanent management proposal. Janelle learned about the invitation while reviewing the corrective pilot. They may replace the whole governance structure, Kendra said, including you, including all of us. Janelle did not call Russell or contact patient representatives. She sent the panel a written acknowledgement confirming that the secondary credentialing failure was real and that the old model depended too heavily on her access. She asked that the finding remain in the final report, even if other evidence proved Marianne exceeded her authority. You are giving them language they can use against you, Kendra said. They already have the facts. Hiding from them would make Marianne's story stronger. Across town, Marianne pressed Tessa to sign the retrospective summary. It claimed Tessa had prepared for executive succession through months of operational shadowing. She had attended donor meetings and budget sessions. She had never shadowed Janelle's clinical workflow. This is not accurate, Tessa said. It reflects the transition we intended, Marianne answered. It says I helped design the care model. It says you were prepared to lead it. I was not. Marianne placed a pen beside the signature line. Tessa did not sign. She left with her calendar notes, the message assigning her temporary credentials, and the donor tour schedule that prompted her to remove the intake buffer. She uploaded them through the panel's evidence portal without contacting Janelle. Her cooperation did not erase her own choices. It established that Marianne's summary was false. The panel compared Tessa's records with server histories, contractor timestamps, and the preservation capture Janelle triggered before synchronization. The sponsor memorandum contained the 72-hour nomination clause and explicit language barring changes to protected clinical pathways without credentialed approval. Badge logs showed Janelle's access was removed at 7:42 a.m. and Tessa's credential made the scheduling changes. The selective export omitted messages in which Marianne acknowledged formal ratification had not occurred. The backdated summary carried metadata created after Janelle filed the continuity notice. A web contractor's timestamp showed Marianne ordered Oakmere's reopening page replaced after the preservation warning. The evidence weakened Marianne's case, but it did not restore Janelle. The preliminary findings confirmed that Oakmere's old system contained a serious governance defect. The expansion remained suspended. Janelle's executive role was declared open rather than automatically restored. External candidates would be permitted. The nonprofit proposal remained active. Patient representatives had not committed to a full return. Russell's funding could no longer be assumed. By Friday evening, Janelle stood outside the darkened chronic care wing while unused equipment was covered. The system she corrected might be adopted by someone else. Her authorship could be recognized while her role disappeared permanently. Marianne's false record was beginning to collapse, but Janelle's defeat remained real. She had protected Oakmere from unauthorized control and might lose Oakmere anyway. The Oakmere governance session opened without cameras, donor banners, or a public audience beyond those formally entitled to attend. At one side sat the non-conflicted governing committee, credentialing custodian, independent quality chair, and fiscal governance specialist. The Patient Advisory Council had one observer and two representatives authorized to describe patient experience but not vote on leadership. Janelle sat beside Kendra with no executive title on her name card. Tessa sat alone. Marianne arrived with counsel. Russell entered last and sat behind the foundation's independent board representative rather than beside either daughter. The panel issued separate findings. First, authority. Marianne possessed limited power to nominate a temporary administrative continuity officer for no more than 72 hours. She had no authority to confer clinical command, alter protected pathways, describe the appointment as permanent, or remove a credentialed leader without governing review. Tessa's acceptance of the acting title and her scheduling changes exceeded that authority. Second, patient continuity. Removing the intake buffer, consolidating appointments for donor presentation, and losing secondary authorization caused measurable disruption. Wait times rose from 24 to 96 minutes. 19 appointments were canceled or transferred. 7 medication reconciliation flags required intervention. The waiting room emptied through documented patient decisions after Janelle activated informed transfer options. The panel found no evidence that she encouraged patients to abandon care. Third, Janelle, server histories, training records, partner agreements, council minutes, and replicated testing established that she designed and led Oakmere's continuity model. The same record established that she postponed secondary credentialing and concentrated too much authority in one account. Her notice protected evidence and patient choice, but it did not excuse that defect. When asked whether she disputed the finding, Janelle said, "No." Fourth, record integrity. Tessa's calendar, contractor timestamps, metadata, and complete export showed Marianne's retrospective summary was created after the crisis and presented as prior planning. Her selective email production omitted material discussions of Tessa's lack of qualification. Her instruction to replace the reopening web page after preservation notice constituted interference with the review. Fifth, identity. State certified records, historic dependent documents, and prior foundation disclosures confirmed that Janelle Patrice Sutton was Russell Vaughn Sutton's legally acknowledged direct daughter. Oakmere corrected its related party record, and Marianne's implication that she was an unrelated employee was withdrawn. The chair stated, "This finding establishes identity and disclosure obligations only. It does not establish professional appointment, authorship, ownership, or executive authority." Nothing was handed to Janelle. Sixth, Russell. Before the panel summarized its conclusion, he requested permission to make a factual disclosure. He produced the complete memorandum chain and confirmed that he signed a final version while knowing Tessa lacked clinical governance qualifications. "I believe financial exposure gave the foundation a legitimate role in stabilizing the clinic," he said. That belief allowed donor authority to blur into professional command. He did not ask the committee to restore Janelle. He announced that Sutton Health Foundation would withdraw every claimed executive control provision, convert 3 years of funding into non-controlling grants administered by an independent fiscal agent, and surrender naming, veto, appointment, donor tour, endorsement, and lobbying privileges. He would resign as foundation chair for 3 years and submit to an external audit. The committee accepted the disclosure as accountability, not a leadership recommendation. Marianne immediately lost all Oakmere access. The foundation's independent board placed her on leave and later removed her as president after confirming the integrity findings. She received a 5-year bar from administering clinical grants or contacting Oakmere staff and patients. Tessa was removed from the acting role, barred for 2 years from operational leadership in foundation-funded health programs, and required to complete governance training. Her refusal to sign the false declaration mitigated, but did not erase, her responsibility. Oakmere acknowledged its own failure and adopted mandatory credential verification, dual control access, patient notice requirements, and protected preservation procedures. Janelle's suspension was not lifted. The committee approved the distributed authority model for a final pilot and opened a non-conflicted selection process for founding clinical director. External applicants could apply. Janelle could apply only if she accepted probation, independent credential review, shared authorization, quarterly audits, staff appeal procedures, and governing removal power. "Do you accept the findings and the conditions for consideration?" the chair asked. Janelle looked at the 2 separate documents before her, one correcting who she was, the other defining what she still had to earn. "Yes," she said. Her name had been restored in one record. Her role would be decided through another. The final selection meeting took place 7 weeks after the waiting room emptied. Oakmere had completed the corrective pilot under distributed authority, restored more than 90% of protected appointments, and maintained verified transfer options without a single person override. Janelle applied alongside 2 external candidates. She submitted the revised model, pilot results, and a written response to the finding against her. She did not argue that founding Oakmere entitled her to lead it. She explained why the original system became too dependent on her judgment and how the corrected structure protected patients from donors, executives, and founders alike. The committee selected her as founding clinical director under 6 months of probation dual authorization for protected slot changes, quarterly patient continuity review, an independent credential audit, staff appeal procedures, and removal authority held by the non-conflicted committee. She did not regain sole executive control. Sutton Health Foundation received no veto, naming right, or leadership role. The appointment letter cited authorship, tested correction, professional evaluation, and measurable patient outcomes. It did not cite her birth record. On reopening morning, Janelle arrived before 7 in charcoal trousers and a deep plum blouse, carrying her white coat over one arm. The burgundy Master Operations badge was no longer active. It had been mounted inside a training case beside a short explanation of Oakmere's former single-point access failure. At the operations desk, Kendra used one credential for clinical flow, while the administrative coordinator used another for scheduling continuity. Protected pathway changes required both. Janelle could review decisions assigned to her clinical role, but she could not silently override the system. Patients returned gradually. There was no press event and no foundation photographer. Mrs. Bell checked in, placed her cane beside the first-row chair, and asked whether the new process would make her wait another 96 minutes. Kendra told her the estimate was 28. Better, Mrs. Bell said, and opened her book. The warehouse worker returned after completing temporary care at the partner clinic. He nodded to Janelle, but spoke first to the receptionist about his work schedule. The ordinary exchange relieved her more than applause could have. Oakmere was functioning as a place of care rather than a stage for her vindication. Tessa sent a written acknowledgement through the approved channel. She did not ask for forgiveness. She admitted that she accepted authority she had not earned and confused foundation experience with the right to direct a clinical institution. Janelle did not answer immediately. Marian issued the required corrections and remained barred from Oakmere. There was no final confrontation. Process had removed Marianne's authority. Janelle did not need to defeat her again in private. Russell respected the boundary Janelle set. He could send one private letter every 2 months. She could respond or decline. He could not send gifts, propose clinic projects, use staff intermediaries, arrange public reconciliation, or discuss Oakmere funding. His first letter contained no check and no request. He wrote about the winter delivery delay when Janelle was 12 and the card he had kept with her penciled sentence. Need comes before distance. He admitted he had remembered the lesson as a story about her intelligence, while ignoring what it required when money and family authority collided. Janelle read the letter once and placed it in a kitchen drawer. She did not answer that day. The boundary was not punishment. It was the only way to discover whether a father-daughter relationship could exist when Russell no longer had professional power to offer as proof of love. Near the end of reopening day, Janelle stood beside the same waiting room entrance where Marianne had taken her badge. 23 patients had checked in. The room was not crowded, but it was alive again with ordinary sounds, low conversation, a child tapping a chair, a receptionist confirming transportation, a nurse calling a name. Janelle watched Kendra and the coordinator complete a schedule adjustment with separate credentials and continue without looking to her for permission. For a moment, the old part of her wanted to inspect every field. Then she let the decision stand. She had once believed making herself indispensable would keep the family from erasing her. Instead, the strongest proof of what she built was that it could protect people without requiring her to hold every key. A title could be handed to someone in a morning. Trust returned only when the system protected people better than the family protected its name. The room filled again only after no one person, not a donor, not a daughter, not even its founder, could hold every door. Another heiress may inherit a famous name, but the next institution will test whether her work can survive the family that wants to control it. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.